Good morning. How are we doing today? My name is James Sweeney, aka SplitSuit. Welcome back to another video. And today I want to go through some bluff squeezing exploration with you and really look at bluff squeezing from a technical point of view. Now, when it comes to 3-betting or squeezing specifically, these are very, very technical spots. And understanding your numbers, doing some practice between sessions is going to make it much, much easier to find profitable opportunities during actual sessions. So doing this kind of work is very, very helpful. So today I want to go through an exercise with you. This is from the Preflop Math Workbook, page number 206. And without further ado, let's jump right into it. Alright, so let's start by reading the prompt. This is a 5-10 cash game. MP1 opens to 30, the cutoff calls, and you decide to squeeze from the button. And just to be very clear in case you're not fully familiar with the term squeeze, a squeeze is a specific kind of 3-bet. So a 3-bet is the first re-raise pre-flop, right? This is the first raise, this is the first re-raise, so this is a 3-bet automatically. And then what makes it a squeeze is that there's at least one caller after the original raise, right? So because the cutoff called, this is officially a squeeze. If the cutoff hadn't called, this would just be a 3-bet. If MP2 had called as well as the cutoff, this would still be considered a squeeze. So hopefully that kind of clarifies the jargon, just in case you're not fully familiar with the term. So here's the spot, and then as we scroll down below, here is what we're going to explore. Now this might look a little scary at first, but don't worry about it, we'll go through this step by step. Essentially what I wanted to do was help you look at spots in the workbook, kind of taking one situation and then looking at it a couple different ways all on the same page, because I didn't want this workbook to be 500 pages because it could have been. But I really wanted to say, okay, if we put exploration A and exploration B on the same exact page, it can really help you start identifying some of the patterns and trends more quickly. So what we did here is we said, okay, let's assume that middle position 1 has an open raising range of 18% and the cutoff has a calling range here of 13%. And then we're saying, okay, well, based upon a couple different squeeze sizes, so in this situation, squeezing to 120 total or squeezing to 160 total, let's say that they had slightly different continuance ranges, right? Let's say that they continued a little bit wider against the 120 squeeze versus a little bit tighter against the 160 squeeze. That way, again, you can get multiple reps all at once, which is really helpful for a bunch of different reasons, but it's very helpful to sometimes see these things side by side. So again, this might look a little scary at first glance, but this is the kind of work that we're doing in this particular section of the workbook. All right, so let's start by going through this 121 together. We'll start with middle position 1. Again, 18% O range means they open raised 18% of hands. It's just the assumption we're making in this example. And they're going to have a continuance range of 5%. So essentially what we're saying is, what do they open? What will they continue with? And then we're assuming that everything in between those two numbers is what they're going to fold. So you may look at these numbers and say, well, what the heck? How is this particularly useful? What the hell would I do with an 18% number? And I totally understand you if that's your first thought process. And one thing I think that's helpful, if you want to, you don't have to for this part of the workbook, but it could be very, very helpful to, is go in and plug in an 18% range of hands. So in this situation, that would be roughly this, give or take. Maybe you scrape out that hand too, and cool, we're at 18% of hands. So this could definitely be a range of hands you could see someone open raising from middle position with. And then top 5% of hands, okay, what would that look like? Well, that could look like, let's apply a group here for a moment. Maybe this range of hands. How's that feel? Stop. Let me undo it quickly. Cool. So this right here is about 5% of hands, almost exactly. So essentially what we're saying is everything selected right now is what we thought they would open raise with. All the green is what they'd continue with against that squeeze, and all of the blue stuff is what's going to fold against that squeeze. I think that's totally reasonable. You can definitely find situations or people that are going to continue exactly in this fashion. And again, that's how you can start going from okay, just raw theoretical numbers to looking at it and saying, okay, well, that's what it would actually look like in terms of a real range of hands. How would a real person play this? So essentially you're taking the raw range of hands, turning it into percentage form, and you're getting this kind of frequency focused idea over here. So what we're looking for here is how often they're going to fold against that squeeze. Again, holding all these things constant, and we don't have exact hole cards here, so we're not going to deal with blockers. Blockers will factor in a little bit, but it's not going to be as much as you might think, but it's definitely worth going an extra step if you wanted to explore that further on your own for sure. So in this situation, essentially if we take 5 divided by 18, that's how often they're going to continue. And then if we take 100% minus that number, then we have how often they're going to fold. And that's really what we're interested in when we're looking at bluff squeezes or bluff 3-bets in general, is are they going to fold a tremendous amount of the time? If yes, we should really be ramping up the aggression and throwing in a ton of extra bluff combos. If not, then we want to be much more selective with our bluff combos. Again, not saying we want to totally strip bluffs out of our range, rather just wanting to be a little bit more cautious. So you could do this with a calculator and, go in here, say, okay, 5 divided by 18 gets us what, 28%, and then 100% minus that number would tell us how often they're going to fold against our squeeze given the parameters we've already set up. Another option is to use my squeezing spreadsheet. This is available in a name your own price, and yes, you can get it totally for free. I'll leave a link for that in the description box. And you can start plugging in all the numbers from here. So if we wanted to, let's actually just start by plugging in the squeeze size. So that's going to be $120. The current pot right this moment is what, $75? Excellent. Excellent. And right here, we can actually factor in the numbers that we just looked at. So they open raise 18% hands, continue with 5, which means that they fold 72% of the time. By the way, everything in this workbook, you can type your answers right in, which is very, very helpful for reviewing your hands later. Hopefully you enjoy that if you do have the workbook or end up picking it up. And then what we can do is continue running this all the way through. So let's actually, for a moment, let's kind of just stick with MP1 for a moment. We notice over here that we said, okay, if we squeeze to $160 instead of just 120, we think they're actually going to continue with a 4% range of hands, which of course is going to be a little bit tighter. And let's just say that that's what? Jacks plus ace king, throwing 10s, throwing 9s. Okay, we're up to 4%. Maybe it's ace queen suited as well. Again, this is reasonable. You could definitely find people that would continue like this against a squeeze. And I think that's really important to kind of say, okay, these aren't just like random percentages thrown out of left field. Like, these are legitimate things that are very, very realistic. And again, we notice that's a tighter C range. So we can go up here, say, okay, instead of 5%, it's actually going to be 4%. And now we notice that they're folding 78% of the time. Excellent. Perfect. All right, so now let's go further and do the cutoff. And again, you can do this exact same thing. You can just take the raw percentages, right? 4% divided by the 13% gives us how often they continue. 100% minus that number gets us how often they're going to fold. So we could also kind of take a moment and say, okay, well, what would a 13% range of hands look like? And we wouldn't want to do it with this kind of range because chances are that the cutoff in this situation, right, if we're looking here, is probably going to 3-bet some of these hands, right? They're probably going to 3-bet maybe the aces, maybe the kings, maybe the queens, maybe the ace king, right? Some of this is probably going to get 3-bet, at least at some percentage of the time. So it's probably not the best way to say, okay, throw in the kind of open raising percentage of hands. Instead, we might want to use a call 2-bet range of hands. And let's just say it might look like that, right? Which implies that they're going to be 3-betting queens plus an ace king because that's not selected, and then calling these kind of hands. Not saying they are for sure. There's different ways you could build this 13% calling range, but I think this is reasonable. And again, if we're considering that they're going to continue with, what, 4% of hands when you squeeze, well, okay, cool. Could we come up with a top 4% of this that makes some sense, right? The 8s through jacks, the ace queen. Yeah, I think we can definitely come up with something that's totally reasonable. So again, these numbers aren't just like plucked out of left field. You can definitely find some very, very real world application and usability from these numbers. So again, we can do the exact same thing. Go back to the squeezing spreadsheet. They, instead of 18, have a 13% O range. They continue with, what do we say, 4%, which means that they fold 69% of the time. Okie dokie. Perfect. And if we squeeze to 160, they're continuing a little bit tighter is the original assumption. So instead of 4, this is 3, and this all of a sudden is 77%. Excellent. So already right off the bat, we notice that by going just a little bit more, risking 4 extra big blinds in this spot, because this is a 5-10 example, all of a sudden we can notice that those folding percentages start to get much, much higher. And just for the record, this is kind of like slightly rounded out and buffed out because it's not 100% fair, right? It's very possible that this person maybe continues a little bit differently depending on who this person is. Maybe it's not a raw 5%, or maybe this person continues a little bit more liberally if this person folds, thinking that they have a better chance in a heads-up pot, whatever it is. These are rounded and slightly roughed out, but if you can find good situations in these really roughed out spots, that can definitely be a great starting point for finding extra profit in real time. And then the last situation here is looking at the blind. So the small blind and the big blind have yet to act, and it's good to kind of factor them in. Now, we're assuming that they're going to continue with 5% of hands when we squeeze to 120 and only 3% of hands when we squeeze to 160. And that should make a decent amount of sense, right? And their O range is 100% of hands. They haven't acted yet. So we don't have any like inkling of like narrowing their range down in the slightest so far. Only what they could possibly be continuing with against that squeeze. So obviously 100% minus this 5% means they're folding 95% of the time. Perfect. Copy that, paste that. And then this would be 97%, right? 100% minus 3%. Excellent, paste. Perfect. So again, this gives us a nice starting point. And then as we continue going down this page, there are a couple questions down here that we have to answer next. All right, so for the rest of these questions, we could do these by hand, or we could just continue using the squeezing spreadsheet from before. Just to make things a little bit quicker, I'm going to do this, but again, you should definitely do some of these by hand just to kind of start getting through the rhythm, making sure that your brain fully understands what you're looking for, what are the key variables, and also what can be discarded and ignored. But for the moment, and once you kind of get the general process down, using the spreadsheet is totally fine. So starting with what is the break-even percentage of your squeeze, again for the 120 size and also the 160 size. So if we look over here, the current pot is $75, and it doesn't matter if we're talking about the 120 squeeze or the 160 squeeze. Both of them are going to have the exact same pot that we're fighting for. It's what's in the middle before we squeeze. And let's do it first at the squeeze size of 120. Notice that is a 62% break-even percentage. Excellent. And then if we went to 160 instead, going back here, 160, now we're up to a 68% squeeze size. Now, at first you may be looking at this and say, well, this just seems like a lot of busy work. Like, why the heck am I doing this? Well, first and foremost, the more you do this kind of stuff, the more you can start understanding the patterns. And even if you're just able to say, okay, for like a normal squeeze size, I'm probably in the ballpark of 60-ish% for general like squeeze break-even percentage, that's extremely useful because you can find people or spots where people are folding way more than that 60%, even if to say they're folding like 75% of the time and your break even's like 62. Like, that's great. Like, you could throw in like heaps and heaps of extra bluffs in that spot, and you should be looking to do that kind of stuff. But if you're never going to do this kind of work and explore like what are the break-even percentages of like common numbers, that's going to put you at a disadvantage because you're not going to know where the starting point is for throwing in heaps and heaps of extra bluffs. And you notice that these squeeze sizes, right, are essentially a 4x squeeze. So an original number up to $30 times 4 gets us to 120, which is the squeeze we were exploring. And then the 160 is a little bit more than 5x. So again, these are kind of normal squeeze sizes. They're not like egregiously large by any stretch of the imagination, especially in live games. But it gives you a starting point for saying, okay, what are some common squeeze sizes? What are some common break-even percentages of those numbers? And gives you that kind of like default starting point. So very helpful information. Now, the next question is, how often do both MP1 and the cutoff fold in this situation? So we can start with the 160 first, and we notice that we thought that the middle position player was going to fold 72% of the time, cutoff is going to fold 69, and in this same squeezing spreadsheet, we can actually go over here, and we can throw in the folding percentages of multiple players, and it will give us a total folding percentage for all players. So essentially how often we can expect everyone to find that fold button. So in this situation, we said, what, 72 and 69, and then that goes to 0. Is that right? 72, 69, perfect. And then what this does is says, okay, how often is everyone going to fold? And it just simply multiplies the folding percentages together. So 72% times 69% gets us a grand total of 50% folding frequency from both of those players combined. Again, it's a little bit rough and rounded, but it gets you in the ballpark of exploring this situation. And then we can also say, okay, for the 160 size, how often is that happening? So let's just scoot this over here, makes it a little bit easier to see. All right, so 78% for MP1, 77% for the cutoff, and gets us a grand total of 60% of collective folds from those two players. And then the final question is, how often does everyone fold, right? So this is not only factoring in MP1 and the cutoff, but also the blinds. And we didn't think the blinds were going to continue a ton of the time, right? Only 5% of the time when the squeeze size is to 120, and only 3% of the time if it's to 160. But this is still important to factor those players in and kind of see what the collective folding frequency is from everybody. The players who put money voluntarily in the pot already, and the players in the blinds that haven't yet done that. So let's start with this one. Start on the left, start with the 120 size. So 79%, 69%, 95%, and 95%. Gets us a grand total of 45%. Is how often we can expect everyone to find the fold button. And if we go to the larger size, the 160, 78, 77, 97, and 97. And notice that jumps up to 57%. Perfect. All right, so when you are actually doing the workbook, you could go in here and open up the answer key and proof all of your stuff. So I don't know what the easiest way to do this is, but you can kind of, you see page number, see 206, that's the page number we're on right now, has all the information, and then the fold percentages, right, 72%, 78%, perfect, 69, 77, and perfect. And then we can also do it on the bottom stuff too. Again, 68%, 60%, 57, and pop it over just a little bit more, 62, 50, 45. Perfect, excellent. So the answer key is ready to rock and roll, shows you that we got everything right. That's a good start. But next, we want to kind of look at the numbers, just take a moment to kind of zoom back for a moment and see if there's anything we can really discern from this spot. So in my opinion, some of the biggest takeaways here is kind of doing the work of going from a raw percentage form from, again, these kind of frequencies over here into realistic ranges to say, okay, here's what it looks like if we go from percentage to range, or also doing range over to percentages. It also helps us identify where players are folding a tremendous amount, especially the blinds, right? A lot of people don't really consider the blinds when they're doing squeezes, and in real time, it can be tricky to kind of get this granular, but think about how often people are going to give 12 to 16 big blinds action cold from the blinds, right? It's just not going to happen a tremendous amount of the time. In fact, you might even find players who don't even have a 3% C range in the spot. Maybe they only continue with, kings plus, and that's 1%, or maybe it's only 2% of hands, so it might not even be, 3 or 5%. This could actually be quite wide. And one of the things that's really helpful there is if you go in the spreadsheet, and again, like this is what the off-table exploration is for, is to take your time and do these kind of things. Let's say that this was 72. Let's say that this was 69. And instead of 95, let's say this was actually 98% and 98%. Right? You notice that that actually does factor in a little bit, and all of a sudden this 45% goes up to 48%. If we factor in blockers, that could go just a pinch higher as well. So again, these little kind of factors that a lot of people just completely overlook can actually come into play and start creating some really nice spots. Because one of the biggest things that we have to think about here is the break-even percentage of the squeeze. Right, so obviously if we go to a larger number, whenever we bluff for a larger size, we're risking more chips, but oftentimes that could be creating many, many more folds. So you noticed here, we thought that everyone was going to fold here collectively 45% of the time, and we have a 62% break. Now, obviously, this isn't pure auto profit. We can't just squeeze with any two cards and show outright profit, but this could still be a spot that could definitely have some bluffs, and we should have some bluffs in this spot because there are stack sizes left to play for, and it's not like we're going to get shut out every single time. But if we look at it from the 160 squeeze size, and again, this is really part of the really helpful stuff of doing this work side by side, is saying, okay, well, yes, we're risking a little bit more. Yes, the break-even percentage at 160 is 68%, but notice that we're expecting many more folds. And this is before factoring in blockers and those kind of things, which again can benefit you a little bit more as well. So, the gap between this 45 and 62 is significantly bigger than the gap between this 57 and 68. And yes, this still is an auto profit, but we can definitely throw in many more bluffs because, again, our opponents are folding a decent chunk of the time more, and we're only risking an extra few 4 big blinds in order to get this accomplished. And you only really understand this by doing this kind of work, by doing this kind of exploration and starting to look at the technical side of the game rather than just, in real time saying, oh, I don't have the right hand here, or I don't have the perfect spot here, or I have no idea how often they're going to fold here. This kind of forces you to work through that stuff, start understanding the patterns. Again, what is a general break-even percentage for common squeeze sizes that you might use? Even if you don't take the squeeze spots in real time all that often, this will at least keep you focused on looking for the right spots so that when good profitable opportunities arise, you're able to take them with confidence and with technical backing. And as far as I'm concerned, that's very, very helpful at the end of the day. So if you're seeing the value in doing this kind of work and you want to go even further with it, I would definitely suggest picking up your copy of the Preflop Math Workbook. And this is going to prepare you for everything we talked about already, from percentage form to break-even percentage to understanding auto profit and everything in between, and really help you prepare not just for squeeze situations, but even for betting spots and situations where you're facing preflop all-ins, just in case they fight back against your squeeze. You can grab your copy of my Math and Preflop Workbook at SplitSuit.com/preflop and just make it your goal to complete a few exercises per day. You'll complete the workbook in a reasonable amount of time and make real progress on the skills that heavily impact your win rate. A math workbook may not seem like the most exhilarating activity, but at the end of the day, poker is a math game. If you're serious about making money with this game, even if it's just a modest bump to your win rate, this is the kind of work that separates the long-term winners from the rest. So grab your workbook at SplitSuit.com/preflop and start finding extra bluffs from a technical point of view. And that is going to wrap it up for this video. Hopefully you enjoyed, hopefully you learned a little bit, and as always, if you have any comments or questions, please don't hesitate to leave a comment down below. Also, if you liked the video, please make sure to leave a thumbs up and subscribe if you're not already. If you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out. You can always email me directly at splitsuit@gmail.com or just hit me up on any social network. I'm available way more often than I probably should be. Anyway, thank you so much for your time today. If you need anything, let me know. Otherwise, as always, good luck out there and happy grinding.